the woman who drove around with a secret no one could imagine. The first call came in just after 9 a.m. A delivery driver had reported a silver hatchback parked along a rural Tennessee back road, half in the ditch, hazard lights blinking, engine still running. When the first deputy arrived, he expected to find a stranded motorist. Instead, he found a woman sitting behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel, eyes forward, motionless. Her name was Elena Marlowe, 43 years old, quiet, polite, and by all accounts, ordinary. She lived alone, paid her bills on time, and worked as a records clerk at the county courthouse. But what the officers didn't realize that morning was that Elena's life had been unraveling long before they found her car on that road. At first glance, there was nothing out of the ordinary. The car doors were unlocked. No signs of struggle. Her cell phone sat neatly on the passenger seat beside a coffee thermos and a small purse. When they asked if she was okay, she turned her head slowly and said in a low, trembling voice, "I can't drive anymore. He's still here." Deputies exchanged uncertain looks. "Who's still here?" one of them asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she glanced toward the back seat, just a flicker of her eyes, enough to send a ripple of unease through the air. When the deputy opened the rear door, the smell hit him first, a faint metallic tang, like rust and rain. Then he saw the old tarp, carefully folded, and beneath it, something heavy wrapped in layers of plastic. Within minutes, the quiet roadside stop became a full-scale investigation scene. Yellow tape stretched across the ditch, radio chatter filled the air, and Elena was escorted away, silent, trembling, but eerily calm. Detective Aaron Givens, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for unraveling small-town mysteries, arrived shortly after. "You ever seen something like this?" he asked the responding deputy. The man shook his head. No signs of panic. No weapon. Just They unwrapped the tarp in stages, each layer sticking slightly from the damp plastic. Inside, they didn't find a body. At least, not one in the way they expected. What they uncovered were fragments, neatly packaged remains of what appeared to be animal bones, old photographs, and handwritten letters. Each letter was addressed to the same name, Harlan. The writing was neat, deliberate, like someone composing diary entries rather than correspondence. The earliest letter was dated 2008. The most recent one? Just last week. That's when Detective Givens noticed something else. Each envelope was marked with GPS coordinates, small sets of numbers in the corner, printed in fading ink. Back at the sheriff's office, Elena sat in the interrogation room, her hands folded neatly on the table. No tears. No fear. Just quiet exhaustion. "Ms. Marlowe," Givens began, "can you tell me what those letters mean?" She smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "It's where I've been. Where I buried him. Every year on the same day." The detective froze. "You buried who?" Her gaze shifted toward the observation window, where officers were whispering behind the glass. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she said softly. "No one ever does." Forensics later confirmed that the animal bones weren't animal at all. They belonged to multiple human remains, dating over a decade apart. The town of Ridgefield went into shock. News vans lined the street outside her small blue house. Neighbors who had once waved at her while she mowed the lawn now whispered about the woman with the boxes. When investigators searched her home, they found meticulous records, binders filled with newspaper clippings about missing people across 3 different states. All unsolved. All fitting a narrow timeline between 2008 and 2023. There were no fingerprints on the letters except Elena's. No DNA evidence connecting her to any of the victims. No motive. And yet, every piece of evidence pointed back to her. Detective Givens spent nights combing through the data, convinced he was missing something. The coordinates led to various wooded sites, some near hiking trails, others near abandoned farmhouses. At each location, they found small metal boxes buried shallowly in the dirt, each containing one object: a photograph, a lock of hair, or a fragment of bone. It was as if someone had left breadcrumbs for years, daring the police to catch up. When Givens confronted her again, she spoke as if she were reciting a confession rehearsed in her head for years. "I didn't kill them," she said. I kept them safe. He made me promise I would. Who made you promise? Givens asked. Elena's eyes filled with tears for the first time. My husband, but he's been dead for 15 years. The room went silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to stop. Her husband, Mark Harlan, had vanished in 2008, presumed dead in a boating accident off the Carolina coast. No body was ever recovered. No one had ever suspected foul play. Until now. The next morning, the forensic unit found something chilling inside Elena's car trunk. Beneath the tarp, tucked in a hidden compartment beneath the spare tire. A keychain. Faded, rusted, but unmistakable. Engraved on it were the initials. And attached to it, a motel key. Room 108. Detective Givens looked at the tag, then at Elena through the observation window. She was humming softly to herself. The room key turned out to belong to a motel that had been demolished 8 years earlier. But what investigators found beneath its foundation, sealed in concrete, would shatter every remaining illusion about who Elena Marlowe really was. The discovery of the motel key changed everything. Detective Aaron Givens stood in the evidence room, staring at the small, rusted keychain inside a clear plastic bag. The faded blue tag still read, Ridgeway Motel, Room 108. A place that technically no longer existed. The Ridgeway Motel had been torn down 8 years ago after a fire gutted half the structure. The land was left abandoned, overgrown with weeds, and fenced off. But something about that key didn't sit right with Givens. If Elena had been holding on to it all this time, there had to be a reason. By noon, the crime scene unit arrived at the old motel lot, a patch of cracked concrete surrounded by wild grass and the skeletons of burned-out buildings. The autumn air was heavy with mist, the kind that made the world feel suspended between silence and dread. Givens and his team marked off the perimeter around what would have been room 108. The foundation was still visible, a rectangle of fractured concrete, half buried under vines and dirt. Ground-penetrating radar picked up an anomaly beneath the slab. Something metallic. Something big. The crew began breaking through the concrete, their tools echoing through the fog. After nearly an hour, the first piece of metal appeared, a steel lockbox, sealed shut and corroded with age. When they finally pried it open, the smell hit first, mildew, earth, and something faintly chemical. Inside were dozens of photographs, all black and white, all featuring the same woman, Elena, at different ages and in different places. Some looked decades old. In one, she was sitting on a pier with a man's arm around her shoulders. His face was half turned away, but Givens recognized the initials embroidered on his jacket pocket. Mark Harlan. At the bottom of the box was a thick manila envelope labeled, "For the day they find me." Inside, there was a single handwritten letter. If you're reading this, it means she kept her promise. Don't hate her for it. I made her do this. The paper was brittle, the ink smudged by time. But the meaning was clear. Elena hadn't just been acting alone. When Givens brought the letter back to the station, he knew what the media would do with it, spin it into another twisted love story turned wrong. But this didn't feel like romance. It felt like a pact, a secret that had consumed both of them. Elena was calm when he entered the interrogation room again. Almost expectant. "You went to Ridgeway, didn't you?" she asked before he could even sit down. "Yes," Givens replied. "We found the box. And his note." Her lips trembled, forming a faint smile. "Then you know, I kept my promise." "Help me understand, Elena. What promise? Why were there bones in your car? Why were you burying things for 15 years? She hesitated, not from fear, but from the weight of what she was about to say. "It started the night the boat went down," she whispered. "He didn't die out there. He came back." The detective leaned forward. "You're saying Mark survived?" She shook her head slowly. "Not exactly. He came back, changed. I tried to tell people. No one believed me. They said grief can make you see things. So I stopped talking about it. But he was there, watching me, whispering to me. Every year on the same night, I'd see his reflection in the rearview mirror, sitting in the back seat. And each time, he'd tell me where to go." Givens exchanged a tense look with the forensic psychologist observing through the one-way glass. The statement could easily be dismissed as delusion, trauma, guilt, or some deep psychological fracture. But the evidence, the letters, the coordinates, the remains, all suggested something real had happened. "Elena," Givens said carefully, "what exactly did he tell you to do when you drove to those places?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He said they were his mistakes, that I had to make them disappear." "Who were they?" Her eyes filled with tears. "The ones who knew what he did before he died." The air in the room thickened. Givens felt his stomach twist. He leaned forward. "Are you saying your husband killed them?" She nodded slowly. "And I cleaned it up. For him." Every confession raises more questions, but this one tore open something deeper. If Mark had indeed killed people, then Elena had been disposing of the evidence, bit by bit, for more than a decade. But there was still one glaring problem. Mark Harlan's remains had never been found. The next day, Givens authorized a search of the Marlowe property. Underneath the garden shed, a place Elena often mentioned pending, investigators found another buried container. This one was different, newer, cleaner, deliberately protected from decay. Inside was a leather-bound notebook filled with maps, handwritten notes, and dates that matched each disappearance from the cold case files. The final entry, dated just 3 days before her arrest, read, "The last one is done. The road is clear. Soon I can stop driving." That night, Givens sat alone in his car, replaying the statement over and over. The last one is done. Did that mean she had finished covering something up, or that she was planning to do something else? He didn't have to wait long for the answer. Just after midnight, the lab called. They'd identified a partial fingerprint on one of the envelopes inside the trunk, and it didn't belong to Elena. It matched Mark Harlan, but that was impossible. He'd been declared legally dead 15 years ago. Givens stared at the report, the fluorescent light buzzing overhead. If Mark's prints were on those letters, and the letters were from recent years, then that meant one thing. Mark Harlan hadn't died. He'd been alive. And someone had been helping him all along. By dawn, Ridgefield was awake to a nightmare it didn't understand. The name Mark Harlan was back on every local headline. The man who had died at sea, now at the center of one of the strangest criminal investigations in Tennessee history. The sheriff's office phones rang nonstop with reporters, conspiracy theorists, and families of missing persons. Detective Aaron Givens hadn't slept in 2 days. The coffee in his cup had gone cold hours ago, but he couldn't stop reading the lab report. The partial fingerprint from Elena's envelope wasn't old. The ridge detail was too sharp, too recent. The DNA analysis confirmed it. The print was less than a year old. Mark Harlan wasn't just alive. He'd touched something Elena had mailed less than 12 months ago. Givens looked up at the whiteboard, dozens of photographs and evidence tags arranged like a puzzle that refused to solve itself. In the center sat 2 pictures. Elena, expression calm and vacant. Beside her, Mark, smiling in an old wedding photo, his hand on her shoulder. The question that gnawed at him now wasn't how she'd hidden the truth. It was why. When Givens entered the interrogation room again, Elena was staring out the window. She looked smaller than before, like someone shrinking under invisible weight. "Elena," he began quietly, "the fingerprint we found belongs to Mark. And it's recent." She didn't flinch. "I know." He leaned forward. "Then tell me where he is." Her lips curved into something between a smile and a tremor. "You've already seen him," she said softly. The detective's heart thudded. "What does that mean?" She turned her head slowly, meeting his eyes. "He was never gone. He's been here, the whole time. Just not where you think." Before Givens could respond, a knock came at the door. The forensic unit chief stepped in, pale as chalk. "Detective," he said quietly, "you need to see this." They led him to the evidence garage, where Elena's car had been impounded. One of the techs had begun disassembling parts of the vehicle, and when they reached the rear upholstery, they found something wedged deep behind the passenger seat. A strip of skin. Preserved. It was small, cleanly cut, wrapped in clear plastic. Under UV light, faint ink markings became visible, part of it too. The initials MH. Givens felt the air leave his lungs. "Run a DNA test," he ordered. 6 hours later, the results came back. It was Mark Harlan's flesh, but with one horrific detail. The cellular decay suggested it had been preserved for years, not days. The next day, Givens and his team searched Elena's house again, this time dismantling the walls, floorboards, even the air vents. In the basement, behind a row of boxes, they found a second vehicle registration for a 1978 Ford truck owned by Mark Harlan. It had never been officially decommissioned. Elena was transferred to a psychiatric holding facility while investigators searched the rural outskirts for that missing truck. They found it 2 days later, deep in the woods off a forgotten road, covered in ivy and rust. Inside the cab, on the passenger seat, was a man's skeletal remains dressed in the same jacket Mark had been wearing the night he disappeared. The driver's side, however, was perfectly clean, wiped down, preserved. And on the cracked dashboard, written in faded ink, were the words, "Keep driving." When they told her what they'd found, Elena's reaction wasn't shock or sorrow, it was relief. "I told you," she said softly. "He never left me." Detective Givens pressed on. "You've been driving around with his body, haven't you?" She nodded, tears spilling silently down her face. "He said he couldn't rest until the truth was hidden. I did what he asked. I kept him close, always beside me. We drove to every place he told me to go." Givens leaned forward. "And the others? The missing people?" Her gaze darkened. "They found out. About him. About what he'd done. He said they were dangerous, that they'd ruin us both. I just helped make it right." There was a long, suffocating silence. When she spoke again, her tone changed, lighter, almost fond. "You know what the strangest part is?" she whispered. "Sometimes, when I drove at night, I'd talk to him, and he'd answer, just like before." Givens sat frozen, caught between disbelief and pity. He had seen delusions before, but this was devotion carved into madness. Weeks later, after Elena was formally charged, the autopsy on the remains in the truck revealed something that made even the pathologists go silent. Mark's body had been embalmed, expertly preserved long before the supposed boating accident. It wasn't the work of a funeral home. It was done privately, carefully. The medical examiner's report concluded that Mark had died from blunt force trauma to the skull. The timing? The very same night Elena claimed he came back. When Givens confronted her one final time, she didn't deny it. "I didn't mean to kill him," she said softly. "He wanted to leave. I couldn't let him. I told him he belonged with me. And he said, if I truly loved him, I'd never let him go." Her voice cracked into a whisper. "So I didn't." She turned her eyes toward the window, where dawn was breaking through thin clouds. "He said he wanted to see the world. So I drove. Every year we went somewhere new. Just me and him. I made sure he was always safe. Always with me." For a moment, Givens couldn't breathe. Elena looked down at her folded hands. "It's funny," she murmured. "You think people notice when you're carrying something that heavy. But no one ever looked twice." The trial that followed captured the nation. Headlines branded her the woman who drove with death. Experts debated her sanity. But those who'd spoken with her said the same thing, that she didn't sound insane. She sounded content. When she was finally sentenced, her only request was to be buried beside her husband. The court denied it. Subscribe for more dark mysteries, true crime documentaries, and real-life suspense stories every week.